Evelia, where are you from?
I'm from Jackson, Mississippi, actually, but I've been in Los Angeles quite a while, 30 years.
Okay, well, I spent a lot of time in Mississippi during the 70s and 80s and 90s. I was working for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law.
Okay, did you ever know John Walker?
That sounds familiar, yes. Wasn't he from Arkansas?
No, John was a native of Washington, D.C. and had come down with the Freedom Riders.
Well, there was a guy named Frank Parker who was head of the office of the Lawyers Committee, and Nauset Stewart.
Wow, okay. I had left Mississippi by then for New York. I don't know, I'm sorry.
What year did you move from Mississippi to New York?
I went to New York in 1967.
Okay, well, then that's probably, no, actually, Frank got there about 65. There's a lawyer named Rob McDuff who was working at the Lawyers Committee. He was from Jackson. I think he's now returned to Jackson.
Yes.
And I assume you're familiar with Mike Espy.
Yes, right? Of course. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I live in Fairfax County, Virginia, and Mike's niece, Therese, lives here, and I, wrote some postcards and did some stuff. And most importantly, I think relevant to this upcoming call is Charisse called me in desperation, said they needed a voter protection lawyer down there in her brother's race for mayor of Clarksdale, Chuck Espy. And so I made a couple calls, and there wound up being a lawyer coming down there, and Chuck won. He's now the mayor of Clarksdale.
Wow.
Chuck and Charisse's father had been mayor of Clarksdale for decades.
Okay. Well, listen, those names make me want to be in Mississippi again, and so that must be very, very. Those are strong words, Clarksdale. But
well, it was also really extremely heavy when I was doing these postcards with Charisse, and she said, "Oh, I'm calling my dad now. You want to talk to him?" They're in the funeral business for decades.
I see. Okay. Are you there? Yeah. Okay.
I'm here. And I asked him, what did he think about Cindy Hyde-Smith's remarks about wanting to sit first row of lynching? You remember that?
Sort of, yes.
Yeah, she was running for the Senate.
Okay.
She had
let's jump in now, because we're rolling here.
We're rolling, Harvey.
We're just
Harvey,
we're preliminary phases, and we got Steve Spitz, Evelia, Mark, a few other folks on already. So
okay, the net.
We got 5 people on so far. Steve, you look
okay, Harvey.
I'm trying to start off. Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi, Donette. Hi, Mark Lamette. Evelia. Can you all see me?
Yes, you look great.
Thank you, Harvey, but I have something special for you. You see my cap?
Oh,
yeah.
dear.
Is that a Go Blue cap?
Yeah.
I can't see. I got enough light. You don't have enough light, Steve. You got to turn on a light so we can see you better.
Okay, I'll turn on the light.
Get your Hollywood lighting guys.
I wonder if I should get brave and actually show my face.
Why not?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Show your face. Or
I don't want to see it.
All right, so I'm gonna actually put in my fake tooth.
Hey,
So you guys all see me now, right?
let's get vain. Let's get vain. Okay, let me see. I don't know what I look like actually.
Well, my kids might tune in and they get mortified when I don't wear my fake too.
I understand. Let me see if I can try this and see what the hell.
There you go. I can see you.
I am.
How you doing?
Okay, how do we properly do this? Do I have to hold
No,
the phone
just
way up?
sit still. Don't move around.
Oh,
Just
dear.
keep the phone still. There you go.
Yes. Okay,
Yeah.
hi.
Otherwise, when you move the phone around, you're losing focus. So,
Well, that means I will not be able to last an hour and a half for sure. The phone
yeah,
is
but
in my hand.
What you got to do is then when you want to get up, you just turn off the video.
yeah,
and
just turn
Yeah.
off the video when you don't want to be on, or
Yes.
hire a cinematographer.
How am I as a photographer?
Yeah,
I'm
cinematographer.
okay. I'm okay. I used to do it
Yes.
for money.
Oh, okay.
Hey,
Well,
listen. Oh, where'd he go? Hello? Somebody.
Hello.
Yeah. All right, Harvey. Hi.
you
The
don't know
man
who
I was just speaking with, where is he?
Stephen?
He's in Virginia. I was trying to get to that part.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm in Virginia.
My family's from Lynchburg.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I thought you might say that.
So you're big friends with Jerry, right?
No.
I'm kidding. Jerry Falwell?
What?
Look, no. I can't even imagine a connection except maybe Virginia. Lynchburg, yeah. No.
All right, Harvey, take it away.
Well, we got time yet. We're 2 minutes early.
Okay.
Hey,
Oh, is that what it is?
hi Norm. Norm has not changed clothes for a whole week.
Oh, no.
Certainly hasn't shaved.
No, I just put these back on again, special for this meeting.
Is it Art Levine? Is it the journalist, Art Levine?
Hi, Dorothy.
Yes, yes, I'm attending. I'm working on a person on voting rights related issues for the Washington Monthly. But anything that I say, I may just is off anything that I say will be off the record because I'm still pursuing my story and I'm consider myself an advocacy journalist, but anything I make in terms of suggestions or comments or things like that would be off the record.
What about anything?
Well, the thing is taped.
Oh, so will that be made? No, that's fine. So I probably won't say very much. But my question is the previous meeting audio or video of it available?
Yes, they're both. We've had two, and they're both available.
Okay, so I think I may or may not have gotten one from Robert, but I'm not sure. So if you could make sure that the previous two would get sent to me, that would be appreciated.
Well, email me after the.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
But they are all posted at Pornhub. So if you want to go to Pornhub and get them, that's fine.
It's a good joke. It's a good joke. Okay.
Is everything we say off the record, or what's that?
No.
Everything you say will also be at Pornhub.
No, it'll be. My understanding, Harvey, from talking to Robert earlier, was that comments are on the record unless people indicate otherwise. Because some journalists, like previously Stephen Rosenfeld, and so on. However, in my case, because I'm a journalist still working on a story, even though it's being recorded, any comments that I make on my end need to be off the record. That on my end.
You can preface it, but just be quick. We want to.
Oh yeah, no, I understand it. I understand. So I'll probably just be sitting here taking notes, and if I have to communicate anything privately, or suggestion type things, I'll send it to Harvey directly.
Okay, and this is a 90-minute talk, but it tends to go really quickly.
Okay.
Because we're dealing with hardcore stuff here.
Okay.
Paul Zeitz?
Yep, I'm here.
Hey, Dr. Paul, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I just sent to you and Emily and the PDF of the article on vote by mail. So if you want to send it to the list, we have 23 people on now. We'll start at 5 past, so that's in 3 minutes.
Now, the article you're referencing, is that some previous, is that something that isn't well known, or is that the Rosenfeld? What article are you referring
No,
to?
this is a vote. It's a draft, a vote by mail. I can send it real quickly now to whoever wants it. So Art Levine.
Yeah.
Art. Okay. Anybody else want this doc? Anybody else not get it? It was attached to the previous mailer.
Evelia.
Okay.
Okay.
Sally Castleman.
Okay. It's a PDF.
Rodney Sadler. Senator.
Emily Levy, although you just sent it to me again.
Sally Castleman, what's your, it's STS. What's your email? I mean, this will go to every, Paul, you'll be able to send it to everybody, right?
I think I've already sent it. Yeah, it's in their inbox.
So, all right, I'll just send it right now to Avelia and Art. And Sally, what's your email real quick?
I mean, I can,
I don't have it real quick here, so.
Should we just put our emails in the chat if we need to?
I think so. Is that okay? Does that work, Paul?
yeah, I mean, it's only for people that haven't gotten it, and please check your email. It was sent out with the invite for today's meeting. So
yeah, everybody should have it.
Happy to resend it if you didn't get it.
I didn't get the invite for today's meeting either. This is Emily.
Oh, you should have.
Really?
No.
Can you drop your, if anyone that didn't get the invite for today's meeting, yeah, please put your email in the chat and I'll definitely add you to the list. Sorry, Emily. I'm glad you found it anyway.
You guys want to pop?
What? Oh,
You want to pop?
I do.
All right, I'll mail you one.
Hey, Joe, lunch, huh? Or is that dinner?
That Dorothy?
Yeah.
Joel, I'd like one.
What up, Steve?
How you doing?
We both have white hair now.
Oh yeah.
Remember you had blonde
longer
hair.
too. That looks
It's
good.
good to see him. Yeah,
That
Dorothy,
looks,
this,
purple.
No hair.
Purple, right?
this is my
Grape?
dessert.
Grape.
Is there a share button?
This is
'Cause
my tribute
then
to
we could have some.
Prince, Purple Rain.
I want to know how many of you people on this call are wearing pants?
I am.
The recording has started, Harvey, just so you know.
Harvey wants this on
We want
Pornhub.
to
He
spice
usually
it
wants
up.
this on Pornhub, so you know.
Thank God for Harvey and a sense of humor, man. These calls
Yeah.
too serious.
Well, those are the 3 stocks I wish I'd bought before the pandemic are Zoom, Google, and Pornhub.
It's all the same. It's all the same.
You're a classy guy.
Oh, boy.
All right, we're at 2:06. We have 31 participants. Should we start?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yes.
Okay, Paul
No one
Zeit.
want to do it?
Paul
Hi,
Zeit.
hi everyone. My name is Dr. Paul Zeitz.
Is there any payment without this?
We're good.
What? No.
We're good.
I'm going to put everybody on mute.
Don't play with me. You have to make your payment.
Pops.
Okay, you're all on mute now. Welcome everyone to I think this is the 3rd weekly call of the voting rights in that time of COVID. Harvey, I'll unmute you. And Joel, I'll unmute you. So Joel Siegel and I have been co-created the COVID-19 Emergency Response Group, which is a newly forming movement of stakeholders working to save as many lives as possible from the COVID pandemic. And many of our colleagues, Jennifer Roberts and Bill from PDA and others are on this call. Rodney, I heard, have been helping. Danette and others are helping with that. And we're co-sponsoring this with Harvey Wasserman from Solartopia. And I'll turn it over to him. This Zoom is being recorded, and Harvey is then putting it up on the web in various sites that he can describe. And we're happy to have you all. And if you are gonna want to ask a question, you can raise your hand under participants, raise your hand, and I'll make sure Harvey calls on you, or put a message in the chat and we can make sure your question is answered. So over to you, Harvey.
Okay, so we have a set agenda here, more or less. We have 33 people on the call. I know that Norm Stockwell wants to leave a little earlier, so we'll get to him early as quickly as possible. Well, the purpose of this call is to, as we proceed, is to lay out the realities of the upcoming election. We know that most of it will be on vote by mail, and we want to make sure that we understand as much as possible the detail of the realities of vote by mail and what we're going to be up against. I have circulated and Paul has sent, I've written a PDF, a document on many of the basic points that we're going to have to deal with vote by mail. And the point is to lay them out in a document that will be available to all local organizers. It's not a petition. Emily Levy has done a beautiful petition with many signees to various officials asking for various things for vote by mail. And so there's overlap. Ironically, her document has 18 points, just like mine. But we want to go through it in excruciating detail so that everybody, we have 6 months to the election, so that everybody who is going to be working on a state-by-state basis, and we believe, based on our previous 2 conversations, that the principal organizing will be done in the states. And so we want to have this document for every organizer on a state level to be able to cope with what vote by mail really means. Next week, we'll discuss the registration rolls. We'll have Andrea Miller on and hopefully Greg Palast, who's got a new book coming out, to discuss what we face with the registration rolls. And the call after that, we'll deal with the networking. We'll see what organizations are out there. We'll allow them to, we'll encourage them to introduce themselves. We'll build a database. We're also going to talk about building a database for people to use, where this document will be, these documents will be available. There's no imperative to reach consensus. We don't have a name. We don't have any kind of organizational structure except what Paul gives us when he sets up the Zoom call, for which we're eternally grateful. So thank you so much, Paul, for doing this, okay? We have 36 people on, which is great. We'll start at the top. We've been talking about state-by-state strategies, which is what we want to do. We want to build organizations in each state that will know the procedures in each state inside and out. We've been talking about 12 states that will decide the Electoral College. The New York Times has now come out with an article yesterday basically saying it's going to be 6. The 6 that they named are Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, and Arizona. All 6 of these states have extreme right-wing legislatures. 4 of them have Democratic governors, which is different from 2016. In 2016, only Pennsylvania had a Democratic governor, and it didn't do us any good. So now we have Wisconsin, Michigan, and North Carolina have Democratic governors, but we have the same extreme right-wing legislatures, which create tremendous problems especially for vote by mail, but for any other kind of voting. The other states that we've named are Minnesota, Ohio, New Hampshire, New Mexico, Nevada, and Iowa. Those are more, again, when you get to 12, those are traditional swing states, and then we've given outside chances to Georgia, Texas, Kansas, Montana, Kentucky, and West Virginia. But the 6 states that the Times says are going to decide the presidency are the ones I just mentioned. Now, at the top of the list is Wisconsin. We just had a primary, a catastrophic primary, in which people actually contracted the virus and may be dying. And we have with us the publisher of the Progressive magazine, who was with us before, Norm Stockwell. So, can you unmute Norm Stockwell?
Yeah, I'm unmuted here. Thanks.
We'll see him in his North Country glory here. I swear you're wearing exactly what you wore last week.
I know, it's my uniform. It's my uniform for this call. I put it on special for you.
Well, my washing machine is broken, so I won't discuss that. But go ahead. Tell us, things happened in the last week. Tell us what has now happened in Wisconsin after this catastrophic primary.
Yeah, well, and there's a couple of updates. I mean, one you sort of alluded to, which is they now think that there's at least 50 cases of positive tests for COVID-19 of people who were involved in either working at the polls or voting on Election Day on April 7th. So it's quite a significant impact of this forced voting. But there's an interesting analysis that was just done by the Washington Post that was published yesterday, that it turns out that the result of the Supreme Court decision around the date that ballots could be received has made an interesting positive difference, which is that the Wisconsin law usually says the ballots have to be received by Election Day. Coming out of the back and forth in the courts, they were trying to get ballots to be able to come in later in the week and be counted later. It went back and forth. It finally went to the US Supreme Court, which decided that ballots postmarked on Election Day could be counted. And so the result of that was an additional 30,000 votes that were counted in this election that wouldn't have been had it not been for that. Now, there was also a number of ballots that were turned away because they weren't postmarked by that date. But the interesting thing is now there's lawsuits in, I think it's 4 other states, which have this rule about ballots must arrive on Election Day to say that they can be counted if they're postmarked on Election Day. And that's very important because, as we've seen, at least in the Wisconsin case, there was quite a bit of difficulty around the delivery of those ballots. And so if the ballots are allowed to be counted if they've been postmarked, it means there could be quite a few additional votes available that were counted or that were postmarked but not yet received on Election Day. So it's an important little quirk to the Supreme Court decision, and it's being used, like I say, in these other court cases. I know North Carolina is one of the states where that's being the Supreme Court decision is being used as precedent in this case that's being filed right now in North Carolina. So that's the update from Wisconsin. Again, the statewide result was actually good, which is that we were able to displace an incumbent conservative Supreme Court justice with a progressive Supreme Court justice. So that tips the balance a little bit. It's still a conservative majority on the court, but it's 4-3 now rather than 5-2, which may come into play in the case that's going to come before the court later this year about whether or not to purge those 200,000, 230,000 people from the voting rolls in Wisconsin. So,
Steve Rosenfeld, you have a question? Paul, can you unmute Steve Rosenfeld? S. Rose there. So is the Supreme Court, the liberal Supreme Court justice that won, is her margin of victory going to go up now?
No, that was contributed to her margin of victory. I think this is just an analysis of the ballots that had already been counted as to when they were postmarked, when they arrived, and so on.
Okay, so of course this is generic to all mail-in ballots. Is the question of when they're going to be allowed. My understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that some ballots came in without postmarks. What happened to those?
That is correct, and there was a back and forth on whether or not those would be counted, and eventually it went down to individual election officials in the various counties as to whether or not they would count them. The issue there was that the ballots that the state sent out to people had a meter imprint, and so initially the post office didn't think they had to postmark them. And then after this decision came through, they realized they did, and they came up with a special postmark, but then they forgot to have a date on it. It just said April, but it didn't say April 7th. And so there was quite a bit of back and forth about whether or not to count those ballots. Individual, in Wisconsin, the counties control the vote counts in the individual counties, so the county clerks in each part of the state made their decisions and the votes were counted. So that's separate from this issue about the Supreme Court decision allowing these ballots received after April 7th, but did have postmarks. Those were counted. So,
well, that's quite astounding. And because what you're saying is that county officials were able to decide arbitrarily which votes they were going to allow based on this issue?
that's my understanding, is that it was decided on a county by county basis.
So we could conceivably, in November, have the entire presidency decided by some county official that decides whatever the heck she wants to decide.
Well, in fact, the story of Waukesha, Wisconsin, is exactly what happened in a Supreme Court race that we had several years ago, where the county official suddenly discovered a whole bunch of ballots that had not been counted and counted those ballots.
And that's how Scott Walker got reelected, right?
Well, Scott Walker, this is separate. This was the Supreme Court race in 2013,
11.
was it? I forget.
I think Emily says 11.
11, thank you.
Yes.
It was 11, yeah, it was 11, you're right. It was the Supreme Court race in 2011.
This is totally at the heart of vote by mail. Because in Wisconsin, which is a swing state, and I imagine it must be true in other states, a county election board official can just decide whatever they want to decide about the admissibility of ballots based on when they came in and when they didn't come in. Is that correct?
Well, again, it was the issue, it was the discrepancy of the postmark issue, which was corrupted by the Supreme Court decision, which specified the word postmark in it.
So, but that Supreme Court decision is going to be relevant to the fall election in the fall.
And I think it means that one of the lessons of Wisconsin is that the post offices have to make sure that they postmark the ballots, even if they have a meter imprint. Now, I know several states don't even provide postage for their mail-in ballots, so that's a separate aspect of this issue as well.
That's
I got a question.
That's astonishing. Joel, did you want to say something?
Well, yeah, first of all, I was looking at all the people on the call. There are some unbelievable leaders, like serious leaders on the call. And I think the vision, Harvey, that you share with me, I just want to make sure everyone understands what your vision is. So because what I love Norman's look, by the way. That's not real beltway-ish, you know. I like it. We have to really understand what's the big goal here, and let's see if we can. Sometime, I know you have an agenda, look great, but in the call, if we can open it up to all these brilliant people. I just saw, Ben Potashnik, who I worked with for many years and still do, who's just a former state senator from Vermont and really understands how to build movements and raise money. But if we're trying to figure out a way to do a vote by mail system in 18 states and fight voter suppression, we're going to have an overall strategy. I do agree that we need to have people who volunteers working on this, get existing organizations. I still feel like there has to be money raised to pay people to do this, but we don't stop this until you raise money. But anyway, could you explain, Harvey, exactly what's your strategy?
Okay, so here's exactly what we're doing today. Vote by mail is extremely complicated. I mean, to hear from Norm Stockwell in Wisconsin that county officials can decide basically whatever the hell they want to decide about when ballots arrive. That's a huge thing. So what we want to do first and foremost is create an understanding with a document or several documents that will be made available to everybody who is organizing on a state basis exactly what we're doing with the vote by mail. Now we've had this experience in Wisconsin, and there's a lot to be learned from it. And I've drafted a document which will be an internet article which has been sent to everybody. And if you didn't get it, email me afterwards and I'll send it. But it's the basis of what we're discussing today. There are 18 points to go through. We have to be totally educated on every detail of vote by mail. Then we pass this, then we build the organizations, or the organizations materialize in the states, and they need to know exactly what they're dealing with. I mean, this Supreme Court decision in Wisconsin was viewed as a nightmare. Now it turns around, and there are all sorts of doors that are open.
Harvey, it was the U.S. Supreme Court decision that made this difference,
yes,
not the Wisconsin State Supreme Court.
And I'm sure that the justices had no idea what they were doing, and they would be astounded to hear what you just said, that the door was open for county officials to decide whatever they wanted to decide. So we have to have people in these states, in Wisconsin and all the other states, at every local board, knowing exactly what kind of decisions are going to be made. It is not inconceivable that in November 4th of this year, a county official in Wisconsin could decide the presidency. I mean, it's 100% conceivable. Stranger things have happened. So we have to know exactly what we're up against here. Thank you for that, Norm. We really appreciate it. And keep doing the progressive. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I have to take off shortly, but I think Art has a question there, so I'll wait for
Yeah, in all your discussions here, in terms of the Washington Post article today, and Harvey saying, well, the county official has discretion to do whatever they want about postmarks, I'd like you to be clear, Norm, are you talking about the issue I read the article as there being no discretion for the counties on whether or not they're required to accept something that was postmarked by election day, where the discretionary issue is some other issue you related about hard to read or missing postmarks. So can you please clarify that point?
Yeah, no, that is
being conflated the way Harvey's talking about it.
Right. No, that is absolutely correct. The Supreme Court decision said that any ballot postmarked by election day would be counted. And so those ballots were counted and processed the following week after the election, and then the totals of all the votes were announced at that time. The issue that came in was the question of these ballots that early on had not received any postmark at all, or the ones that had the postmark with the missing date. And then there was a discrepancy about whether or not those should be counted, and there was fights that were had over whether or not to count that. And my understanding is that there has not been any challenge to that issue of how it was decided about those unpostmarked
ballots. So then my question was it left in the hands on that issue for each of the county election official boards to decide what they wanted to do? Is that where the quote, election officials could do whatever they want come in? Can you please clarify that?
Yeah, so it's the county clerks in Wisconsin that administer elections. And so there was a difference in how the different counties chose to deal with ballots that were received but not postmarked on election day. And that's the piece that's still uncertain. I have not heard any challenges to that decision process yet. There may be, but I have not heard any yet.
I'm sorry to be like this, but it's still unclear. So I'm sorry to
press here. What Norm is saying, I think, is that there are, Norm, correct me if I'm wrong, there are probably counties in Wisconsin where different decisions were made. But that would be one county may have allowed ballots that came in without postmarks, and others may not have allowed them.
Okay, so that's where the discretion is, with or without postmarks, or how the postmark was dated. There was not discretion about all of the counties were required to count ballots that were postmarked through election day.
That is correct.
Norm?
Yes, that is
Okay,
correct.
fine.
But they had
And-
discretion on those that were not postmarked at
Right.
all.
And the reason
Okay.
that that's an issue in Wisconsin, is because previously the statute said that the ballots had to be received by election day. And in this case, because of the Supreme Court decision, and this is what the Washington Post article addresses, because of the Supreme Court decision, it opened a window for ballots to be postmarked on election day, but not received until the day after or 2 days after or whatever. And those ballots, apparently, according to the Washington Post study, were 30,000 ballots, which is a huge number.
Jeez, Wisconsin was decided for Trump in 2016 by 20,000 ballots.
23,000, yeah.
Yeah, so there you go. So listen, just to clarify now, we're going through this in excruciating detail. I'm sure a lot of people are rolling their eyes. This is how we need to do this. This is the purpose of this particular meeting, is to get clear so that everybody who's working in the state understands the ground rules of vote by mail, because this is new territory.
Mhm.
You know, we've
So-
had absentee ballots, but not vote by mail on this scale.
Yeah. So the issue that comes up out of this Supreme Court decision is, one, that there are some states where they have a requirement in statute that says the ballots have to be received by election day. That's being challenged now by people that are trying to say postmarked by election day rather than received by election day. Second issue is making sure that the post office does in fact postmark the ballots.
Yes.
And then the third issue, which is coming up in places like Georgia, is whether or not the state will provide the postage cost for people to return those mail-in ballots, which not every state is doing.
Okay, this is all stuff that can decide an election. So this is the point of doing this, because vote by mail is new territory on this scale. We've had absentee voting. We've had 5 states that have been doing vote by mail in various ways since the 80s. That's Utah, Nevada, Hawaii, Oregon, and Washington. But for most states now, this is new territory. And Ray Lutz has said that just because the vote by mail is accepted, it doesn't mean it will be counted. Is there additional filters after that, like signature verification? And of course, the activists in the states are going to want to encourage the post office, if there still is one, to make sure that the ballots that come in are postmarked.
Yeah, and I guess one other issue that came up in Wisconsin is the issue of verification, because on our ballots, we have to have a witness sign. And if somebody is quarantined at home without another person in their quarantined home, there was a question about that. And then there was the question about ID, where you had to, in Wisconsin, upload a photocopy of your driver's license to a website in order to get an absentee ballot in the first place. So both of those were challenged and both of those lost. And so that meant there were people who had submitted their ballots without a witness or with a note saying, you know, no ID available or whatever. And those votes were not counted. So that's one more piece of the Wisconsin complexity.
What court upheld that?
I believe that was the federal district court, but I'm not positive about that. That was a Judge Connolly decision, I think.
So we have a federal decision now that says that ballots have to be, that if a state requires a witness, they have to be witnessed.
In Wisconsin, the state required a witness, and the court decision which was upheld was that that witness signature would have to be on the ballot for it to be counted.
Are they
I don't know that that extends beyond Wisconsin.
Are they requiring a notary? Yes, there are other states that are requiring.
No, it was not requiring a notary. It was just a signature. The signatory, the witness signatory had to put their name and their home address on the ballot in order to.
Okay.
I can't find it.
That's going to be a.
Yeah, here we go. It was, yeah, U.S. District Judge William Connolly.
And so I assume somebody's going to appeal that.
Don't know.
We'll probably lose at the Supreme Court because this Supreme Court will vote 5-4 to require witness signature. So that's something we're gonna have to watch out for. That comes up later in the outline. Okay, Norm, anything else?
That's what I've
I'll
got. Thank you
negotiate.
very much. I got to take
Okay.
off.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Steve
Bye.
Rosenfeld, are you on? Can you unmute Steve Rosenfeld? We want to talk about Ohio real quick, Steve.
I'll be really quick. Hey, I just want to mention with this Wisconsin thing, the Democratic Party's amended complaint that was filed, I think on Friday, said that it was 142,794 ballots that were able to be counted that not otherwise would have been, I'm quoting, because they came in within the week and were postmarked in time. So the Washington Post number might actually be vastly understating what actually was the volume there. And this is the Mark Elias complaint, so the DNC suit. So, and they cite the Wisconsin government Wisconsin Election Commission as the source. So 142,000, not 30,000.
Wow, that's huge. Okay.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm not making this up. I'm just saying. So the thing about Ohio is, and if Bob's on.
So we just had, last Tuesday, we had a catastrophic primary in Ohio. Bob Fitrakis, are you on also?
Yeah, I'm here.
So Bob was there and Steve is reporting on it.
Yeah, why don't you let Bob take it?
This is critical. Steve, tell us what happened in Ohio.
Well, I'm just going to point out one thing and then I'm going to let Bob pick it up here. The biggest difference between Ohio and Wisconsin was Wisconsin had same-day registration. Ohio did not. So what you have in Ohio that is a new issue, and this comes up from the lawyers' committees, election protection hotlines and all, is that the whole issue of the use of provisional ballots comes into play. So when you have people who do not necessarily get their ballot in the mail, they would go to what was a very reduced number of one per county at the Board of Election sites and to try to vote. So unlike just talking about all the barriers around absentees, there's another set of issues that concern provisionals. It's not an either or, it's a both and situation. So I went to the Ohio Secretary of State's website just before this began, and I took a look. So far, as of their latest statistics, 200,000 absentee ballots and something like 44,000
Provisionals
have yet to be counted or have yet to come in and or be counted. So again, we're talking about such big potential volumes here. Now we have a couple more days to go, but still, these are the volumes compared to these tight margins of victory. So
that's a 250,000 ballots. That's a 250,000 ballots.
Yeah, 250,000, that are unaccounted for. So I'm going to let Bob take it from here because he's there. But all I was pointing out was we have more than just one silo of voting procedure to be aware of here. That's what I'm saying. Wisconsin didn't have provisionals because it's same-day registration. Ohio does. Other states do as well.
So Bob Fitrakis in Columbus, my understanding is that Franklin County, which is Columbus, has 1.5 million people in it, and they had one place to go in person, which was in an abandoned Kohl's hardware store in the middle of nowhere, and there were lines of people in cars. Can you give us more on that?
Well, you're right. Kohl's department store, which is out on Morris Road, so
what's the middle of nowhere?
Columbus, right? It's on an old kind of dead mall strip. But there were cars, there was 15, 20 minutes late. They hired police officers to direct traffic. The biggest problem, again, were people who got their ballots despite sending them in plenty of time, that the ballots were in fact didn't arrive in time, and also a significant number of people in both parties who ended up with the wrong party ballot. But Steve's right, the essentially more than the 200,000 figure constitutes more than 10% of the vote. So they're calling a lot of these elections, even though 10% of the vote's not in. And I know people have made this point repeatedly. but one of the biggest checks used to be at the precinct. So the broader question is whether or not, that we're going to get, when are we going to get all these fit back into precincts, which uncovered, the misdeeds in '04 because they were over 100% of the vote in the 90s. In certain areas, they had impossible numbers. And also the high number of provisionals, which only occurred at the last second because the Secretary of State said, look, there's a federal law that allows you. So you had these, at the last second, they had to put together essentially, poll workers who were practicing protection and social distancing in order to get a lot of those 44,000 provisional votes. And there's an agreement is we don't know what's going to happen in the fall. And again, a huge, huge battle. Secretary of State said there may be some places that'll actually be open, but the state legislature has said, look, it's up to us. It's not up to you. You administer the elections. We'll make the law, and they haven't made the law yet.
So the state legislature in Ohio is extremely gerrymandered, 2/3, 3/4 Republican in a state that's 50-50 Republican and Democrat. And they, like the legislatures in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina, not to mention Florida and Arizona, they are not shy about doing whatever they can to prevent people from voting that they don't want to vote. So in Ohio, the procedure, they send out a postcard, right? Then you got to ask for an absentee. You have to then get an application for an absentee ballot. Then if you're lucky, you get an absentee ballot, and then if you're lucky, you can mail it in, or you can go up to Kohl's, I guess, and drop it off, right?
Well, part of the problem too is people were having problems downloading the application, and the applications, virtually all the government buildings were closed. So it's virtually impossible, unless you had very good transportation and willing to risk disease to even get the ballot applications.
And did they require a notary or witness?
No. But they, again, I've talked about this before. They warned you about if your ballot inside the envelope, inside the other envelope wasn't properly sealed, they weren't going to count it because it may indicate tampering, even though they weren't closing well at the edges. And somebody talked about this, I've said it before, a lot of their early mailing in Franklin County was metered without a date. So you don't know when it was actually sent in.
So we have a mess in Ohio that involves 250,000 votes.
Yes.
All right. So anybody working in Ohio, I mean, it's going to be like this in other states as well. So this is what we got to be prepared for.
Yeah, Harvey,
okay.
I would just add one other thing to this, and that's this. If you think about the 44,000 provisionals that were cast, these are people who at the last minute decided to go and do this in person. That really speaks to voters' habits and what people are familiar with. And so when you have like a state like Ohio or other states that are trying to make a wholesale shift to an unfamiliar, largely unknown, and not an unadvertised voting option, way of doing it, you're going to see things like people are going to revert back to what they're used to. And so there's this human behavior dimension to all this that we really need to think about, because what it means is we got to tell people early what's really going on, because they're just used to doing stuff the way they've always done it at the last minute.
Yeah, so that's a really good point, because people who are organizing in the states from Ohio to Wisconsin or whatever, we have 6 months minus 1 day, it's now May 4th, to educate the public state by state on exactly how they're going to be able to vote. And you know, the result of people not knowing in Ohio in this insane primary is that the 250,000 votes are just up in the air. And we'll probably get a lot of decisions made by county officials as to what they want to do. They'll be people will be arbitrarily deciding what votes are going to be allowed and not allowed, and it won't even be consistent county from county. Is that right? Is that a fair appraisal?
Quite possibly. I mean,
Yeah,
Bob-
yeah. Again, Ohio has a long tradition of giving their counties tremendous discretion in how they count provisional. Really going back to Blackwell in 2004, where there was a massive discrepancy between rates of provisionals, which are virtually always accepted in rural Republican Ohio and really are targeted in Toledo and Cleveland and the urban areas.
And in the urban areas like Cleveland and Columbus and Cincinnati, Akron, Toledo, Dayton, Youngstown, you're only going to have one voting place, one place where you can go for a very large urban area, and nobody's going to know where it is, and there'll be long lines of people in cars, and unless we can get changes and get more voting stations between now and November 3rd, that's going to be the situation. And people working in Ohio and the other big states are going to have to figure out, are we going to get more voting stations? Are we going to be able to direct people? And also, are they going to be open prior to Election Day? And, you know, that's a big deal. We had souls to the polls on Sunday. How long, when are these voting stations going to open? And when are people going to be able to come to them? I mean, I don't know what the law is.
And if they're crowded, they'll be unsafe as well. I don't see, I mean, it's going to be, one is going to concentrate so many black voters on the Sunday, it seems like it would be unsafe.
Right. So these are all issues that are really up in the air, and we've got 6 months minus a day to solve them. And it's going to have to be state by state and even county by county. That's the reality of vote by mail in 2020. Anybody else have anything on this? Eileen Proctor wanted me to acknowledge we have a Voice of America on the line here. So I'm glad to have you with us, Mark Lamette. And anybody else want to recognize yourself as being with media? But we still have, we're up to 46 people. So this is how it's going to go probably for the next few weeks. We have got to sort through this. We have got to sort through the details of this. I mean, it's insane, literally insane. And if, you know, to come out of a primary in the United States of America in 2020 in the state of Ohio with 250,000 votes up in the air is absolutely unbelievable. And it means that like I say, any county official can decide the President of the United States in the fall if this is the situation. Okay, let's move ahead.
Harvey,
Steve?
I would just say one other thing and leave it here. You know, I spent 4.5 hours on a conference, Zoom meeting earlier today with, this was organized by all these election law professors across the country. There are 50 of them there. And they're talking about all the nightmare scenarios. And one of the nightmare scenarios, one of the things that they're talking about that just people might want to just think about here, is, believe it or not, is that under the 1887 or 88 Electoral College Act, whatever it's exactly called, it's the governor of every state pretty much has the ability to make the final decision if there is a fight in the legislature or between parties about whose slate of electors gets certified. That's what they were presenting. So so the thing here is there's so many places and scenarios where we don't even know how things can break. And the only alternative or response to all this, I mean, this is 4.5 hours of stuff I hadn't never even heard before, where things can break down. And these lawyers were talking about like how things descend into civil war. That's what that was their words. The only thing you can do is have really high turnout so that there's not, people cannot fight for this along the margins of victories in a handful of swing states. And that is the only thing that stops things from basically going. They were talking about they're talking about how we have all these rules, but then the political leaderships and ignore them and basically take over by fiat. And whether or not the courts can have any checks and balances, very up in the air. The only thing that counters that is turnout speed. So the margins of victory are so big that none of this stuff can have legs underneath it. I'm sorry to say this, but it's just
Right.
it was shocking to me to hear this.
Well, there's also the detail that came up in 2000 and then in 2004 that when the Electoral College delegations turn up at Congress in January, one senator and one congressperson can challenge an electoral college delegation, and then the Congress meets, and there's a procedure. They have a debate for 2 hours, and they can overturn an electoral college delegation.
There's so many steps along the way here, and I don't want to waste people's time. Where like we're just not even we're barely scratching the surface.
Well, we got to get down there. That's what these meetings are for, and we'll get
But
there.
the bottom line is the only way you really don't let all that stuff have traction is have super high turnout. So you have margins that cannot be basically opposed through all the craziness that we know is out there.
Okay, Steve Spitz, real quick. Paul, can you unmute Steve Spitz?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, go.
Okay, so in Virginia, there was a lawsuit filed by the ACLU challenging the witness signature requirement for absentee ballots. An agreement was reached by the Attorney General that those votes would be counted without witness signatures for the June 22nd primary, but that may still be a requirement for November. That only covered the June primary. You also have, talking about county officials, you also have the problem of absentee ballots are always in Virginia decided as to whether or not they have all the proper stuff, the witness signature. Some of them don't have witness signatures. Some of them don't have the addresses on correctly, and it's up to the individual county or city to determine whether those ballots are counted. The Fairfax County registrar said that he anticipates that 75% of the ballots will be voted by mail. But what that means, which may be a good thing, but then think of the fact that a lot of those ballots are not going to be received in time for them to be sent in, and there'll be a deluge of ballots that will be hard to monitor.
Yeah. Well,
so there are lots and lots of problems. And then finally, the head of our electoral board in Fairfax County said they're going to probably consolidate precincts, just like, Bob was describing in Ohio. And even if you anticipate 75% voting in the presidential election by mail, even if that's accurate, that still leaves lots of people in long, long lines at reduced number of voting locations.
Okay, we got to get to the bottom of this. We know what the stakes are. So the
Can I say something? Hi, Harvey. Could I say something?
Real quick.
It doesn't seem like anybody's responding to the chat, but I was on a Zoom call with Public Citizen last Thursday, and they're asking for Congress for $4 billion to support vote by mail.
Yes,
Do you know what kind of financial difficulties the states are in?
Well, we're pretty sure that Mitch McConnell is going to prevent that from happening. And in addition to that, the money, there was $400 million voted, but it came with no strings or strings that the local county. I've heard rumor that some of the money that went to the states from the original $400 million is just being used for other stuff. So it's very loose about this. And
the question is, how much pressure are the states under to be able to pull this off without enough money, assuming that that's really true, that they don't have enough?
It's going to depend on state by state. This is not going to be decided nationally. It's going to be decided by people in every state, as best I can tell. Art Levine has asked if anybody's aggregating all the lawsuits. I don't know that. We hope.
In other words, Daily Kos had a list, and reporters, I'm not as covering this as regularly as Steve or probably the Voice of America guy, but I mean, the Democratic Party can send you a list of what lawsuits they're involved in. Daily Kos did a list of lawsuits as of a week and a half or 2 weeks ago. I do think it's something that people ought to know about, and it's not clear if any organization, nonprofit or journalism organization, is aggregating all the different lawsuits. If anyone knows,
well, that's one thing we want to do in this
aggregate
call,
the information about who's doing the lawsuit.
Right. we want to set up a website. I'm talking to Alan Minsky and to Emily and to Mimi Kennedy, and in a week or two, hopefully we'll have a location set up where we can do just that. But, and I'm sure we won't be the only one. The more the better, but that's something that has to happen. You're 100% right. Okay, the document that I put out, the Brennan Center, Steve says the Brennan Center has a new report on what it'll cost for swing states, and state revenues are down. I'm sure there'll be people fighting like crazy over every dime that's going to go to this election or not go. Okay, the PDF I sent out, 18 vote by mail challenges in the 2020 COVID election. John Brakey brought this up in the last call. Number one, printing and publishing. The ballots themselves have to be designed, they have to be written, and they have to be printed and published. We've had a terrible experience in some cases. For example, the butterfly ballots in South Florida in 2000 were perfectly designed to lead old Jewish people to vote for Pat Buchanan instead of their boy Joe Lieberman. And they worked to a tease. Thousands of people voted for the person they didn't intend to. It was completely a design error, but it may not have been an error. Also in 2004, in southwestern Ohio, the absentee ballots were sent out that did not have John Kerry's name on them. He was the Democratic nominee for president. Absentee ballots went out thousands, tens of thousands, went out, and Kerry's name was not on them. In California, in both 2016 and 2020, primary ballots went out without Bernie Sanders' name on them. So this means that people working in the states are going to have to be right on top of the printing, the design, the printing, proofreading of the ballots before they go out. And John Brakey has cited serious problems with printers, publishers of these things, and we also got to make sure that they actually get to the post office, okay? Then protecting the voter registration rolls. This is a huge issue. Andrea Miller may join us in a few minutes briefly. Greg Palast has a new book out. We're not going to deal with this. This is number two, the big number two. We'll deal with this next week and the week after in terms of how we're going to deal with protecting the voter registration rolls and getting people re-registered who have been deleted. That's going to be a whole other separate essay, and that'll come next week. And we'll have briefly a word on it from Andrea Miller when she joins us. Number three, who gets a ballot and how? Now, you know, the mail-out procedures are up for grabs. The voting boards, the counties, the state, whoever plays games, they mail them out late. They mail them out to wrong people. We have these partisan legislatures, partisan secretaries of state, governors, who all have their own agendas. In Ohio now, we have a situation where they mail out a postcard, then you're supposed to send the postcard back, and Bob, correct me, or Steve if I'm wrong, you get a postcard if you're lucky, if you don't get it, you don't get a ballot. You send the postcard back, then they send you an application for a ballot. Then you send that back, and then if you're lucky, they send you a ballot by December or January, and you know it's a complete a nightmare, and it's designed to make it more difficult to get a ballot, and the procedures vary from state by state. Now, the governor of Wisconsin advocated just sending every registered voter a ballot. That's obviously what should happen, but that's not going to happen. And so people in every state got to know every detail of how the state is dealing with this issue of sending out ballots, because it's going to be all over the map. And in many cases, it will be extremely discriminatory. And if you've got a three-step process, God knows how many people are not going to get ballots. It's a nightmare. So this is something that the people, the activists, and let's hope there are thousands of them in every state are going to have to know every detail, because many of these legislatures are going to make it virtually impossible even to get a ballot by mail. A three-step process is perfectly designed for failure, and maybe there's more. So that's something we have to be totally aware of and totally on top of. Okay, does anybody want to say anything about that real quick? Okay, number 4.
Yeah, yes, just in general, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay,
just
go.
Voteathome.org, which is the leading mainstream group advising loads of states and loads of secretaries of states, has a lot of resource information about the various steps involved scaling up, and they're developing some kind of matrix that's partially public, not yet fully public, rating and assessing where the different states are in adopting different practices and best practices and so on. So it's very mainstream, but they're the ones who secretaries of state are listening to, and they produce a lot of material.
Can you put that in the chat? Put the
voteathome.org
website in the chat.
Yeah, okay, sure.
And I'll put that in all future documents. Anybody else? That's really good information. That's why one of the reasons we do this.
We also have to note again that in Ohio, over 1 million people didn't get an application to vote by mail in 2016. About 1,039,000, and they were disproportionately in the urban areas. And also the postcard is tied into the purges, which occurred in 2019, but also occurred back in 2015 and 2016, right? That's if you haven't voted in the last 2 federal election, even if they're in the same year, because there was a special election in the 3rd congressional district. By not returning the postcard, they purged you.
And then if you got the postcard, you had to send it back, and then you get an application for a ballot, right? And then
they actually in 2016 sent out like 6 million applications, but they forgot 1 million people, many of them who were purged by the Secretary of State for not returning the postcard to say, I live here.
Oh, God. And now one question, Bob Fitrakis, in Ohio. Can people get their hands on loose applications? In other words, will the counties or the Secretary of State's office print excess applications that can be distributed by voter rights organizations?
They had a huge problem because of the pandemic. The only real place that helped them out was Kroger's, where you could go to the service desk. Is that because there was so much government shutdown, there was really, unless you were skilled and could download them from the computer, which many people reported problems with, the only place that was known to really have them was Kroger's grocery store.
So if you wanted a voter to apply for a ballot, you could get one at Kroger's?
Yes.
Was there a minimum purchase required? Did you have to buy anything, or did they just give them to you?
There was no place to put them out because the government was pretty much shut down. So you had to be skilled enough. You had to either go out to the board of election, or you needed essentially to go to Kroger's. And if the pandemic is still in place,
God,
or you had to be skilled enough to be able to do it online. And that was a problem. A lot of people, elderly people, lower income people, were complaining they weren't really familiar with how to apply online or to download an application.
So someone has asked, 1,037,000 didn't get ballots, or were they purged, or both?
In 2016, they weren't sent an application. So virtually, every Republican and independent in the state gets it, but about, a sixth of the population didn't get that application. And it turned out that, many of them ended up being purged.
Of course. Okay, and the vote by mail is up. Ruth Strauss asked, can the ACLU sue on the behalf of the citizens who didn't get their ballots? Can anybody sue? I mean, I guess we'll find out. I don't know. Number 4, Jennifer Roberts, are you on with us here? can we unmute Jennifer Roberts?
I am here.
Okay, great to see you. So the issue of the military voting and diplomats and other overseas Americans, this was a big factor in 2000. As I recall, Joe Lieberman just threw it in. I mean, there was something went on with the military ballots that would have swung the election or could have, and Joe Lieberman just said, "Oh, forget about it," something like that. It was a nightmare. So the military votes by mail or electronically, right? And I have heard reports, I haven't seen anything printed, where the officers gather the military personnel in a room and oversee the voting, which is completely illegal. And but you know, I would assume the military being the military that happens, and they probably pump in, you know, Deutschland über alles or something. But you have mentioned, Jennifer, you were a diplomat. Tell us about the other people overseas who vote and how that happens.
Sure. So there are a lot of Americans overseas, not just military. You know, the conventional wisdom is that most of the military, like you said, it's going to be influenced by colonels and generals, or there are going to be a lot of conservative voters. Well, that's not true, because there are a lot of Americans who work overseas. There are people with international companies. There are teachers overseas. The Peace Corps volunteers, I know, have been brought home because of COVID, but they're usually overseas voting. Diplomats are still overseas. It's not necessarily one party or the other. It's good for everyone to have those folks voting. And especially when you look at a pandemic or climate change or other things that connect us to the rest of the world, we need folks that have that perspective to be allowed to vote. When I was a diplomat, I used the APO. I voted overseas, and it's incredibly important. And there are thousands of Americans, not just military, who vote that way every year and have been doing it for 20, 30 years, 40 years.
What percentage of the people overseas vote online as opposed to mailing in ballots? Do you know? Do you have any idea?
I do not have any statistics on that.
Okay, but online voting is allowed for people overseas, is that correct?
Well, part of that, there was a problem with that, Harvey, in that 36 states in 2012 were allowed direct access to the state computers, which creates security problems. Ohio actually only counts the ballots that come in non-electronically. So by many states allowed them to input the data from overseas. And you may recall Seidel was involved with that, which was not a US corporation, was in fact, came out of the Free University in Barcelona. So there were all sorts of concern of, if you allow these inputs electronically, does it create a whole variety of vulnerabilities to the vote count?
Well, yeah, it does. And we don't have an answer for that at this point.
Well, another thing is, I'm sure diplomats use, when they mail things in, they use the diplomatic pouch, which is, it goes straight to Washington and is heavily secure. There is concern about hacking from the internet. A lot of foreign governments are not friendly, and they are watching American computers. So,
right.
Yeah, they hired a private company with a shaky record that wasn't even an American-based company, Seidel, to input for the diplomats, as opposed to sending them over in the more traditional, safe way.
Well, I'm sure that in 2020 we'll have voting done by Putin Inc., which is a major computer company. So that's a problematic area. And you're talking about a lot of votes, right? And it's going to have to be dealt with state by state again. Some of the states are probably going to allow electronic voting. There's no federal law on it that I know of. And then other states are going to demand paper ballots. And then the question is how they're going to arrive and when they're going to arrive. That became an issue in 2000. When did the overseas ballots arrive? Do they meet the deadline? If there's a deadline for state counting and the ballots are coming from overseas 2 weeks later, Are they counted? I don't think they were in the last Florida election in 2018.
That's
Okay.
actually it's a good point to make with conservatives too, because of the military.
Hey, Harvey.
Yes.
Diplomats.
Just quickly, this is Paul Zeitz. Hey, Mayor Roberts. Just quickly on overseas voting, I put in the chat a link to a website on mobile voting, and it talks about the examples where mobile voting is allowed for military families, but also for people living with disabilities. So there are examples all over the country in blue and red areas. There is someone on the call from the mobile voting program. I don't know if they want to say anything, but I don't know if it's going to rise up as an alternative. There are ways of securing it with blockchain and other kind of protective security measures. We do use our phones for confidential medical records, financial records, for boarding passes on airplanes. I think that secure mobile voting is as risky as any of those things. And there's a lot of work going on in that area. I don't know if it'll break open in 2020 or not.
Okay.
Just share the link here for everyone.
Yes. Now, Paul, you'll be able to preserve these links, right? Because we'll need them for our documentations as we move ahead.
Yeah, I can save the chat and send it to you for sure.
Yes, please. That would be great. Okay, and I also want to reiterate, Joel Siegel raised the issue, again, part of the way through here, it's like a commercial break, but we are looking towards, building state organizations. We have to, they or we or whoever is going to have to raise some money for them. We're going to have to locate and help bring up to speed people in the states to get this job done. Like I say, we have 6 months minus a day, but the first thing we're doing in these calls is to compile the information. It is eye-rolling and detail-oriented, but that's where we're at with it. And as you can see, vote by mail, people are looking at vote by mail as this big sort of black box that's going to be, we just plug in. It's not going to be that way, not at all. Point 5 on the PDF, and I hope everybody has it. You don't have to open it now, but you will. Is when will the return the applications and ballots, will they be pre-stamped or mass harvested? Now, this is an issue. Bob in Columbus received an application, and the stamp was on the back of the envelope, and there was a mess. And there's argument. The money issue has been raised. Are the states or the counties going to pay to send out pre-stamped applications or envelopes for ballots to be mailed back in that are pre-stamped? Or is the individual voter going to be providing this, or are organizations going to be doing this? I mean, technically, I guess you could argue that if you have to buy your own stamp, that's a poll tax. And that's banned by the 24th Amendment. But how are these ballots going to get in? And we've had the issue in North Carolina of mass harvesting, where some clown was hired by a Republican candidate to go around and get everybody's ballot and bring them in, and which is called vote harvesting, mass harvesting, which is got to be illegal and got to be dealt with. That guy's in jail, and our people have got to be made clear that you can't do that. Not that I know of. You can't go to somebody. You should not be allowed to go to somebody and get their ballot and bring it in. It's got to be, you got to either drop it off or mail it, right?
I think you can in California.
What's that?
I think you can in California.
I think you're right, actually. People do go around gathering ballots in California. And, this is something that we're going to have to deal with. It. Every state's going to deal with this differently. But we've seen in North Carolina, it's illegal, or at least on some level. Some guy wound up in jail. Jennifer, do you know about that?
Yeah, absolutely. He wound up in jail for other things as well. But the challenge
delivering meth when he
was that he had workers with a particular campaign. Yeah, they were collecting ballots that were not filled out and were not sealed, and posing as county workers who were allowed to do that. Then they were signing as witnesses. We require two witnesses for a ballot in North Carolina, and they had the same person sign like 400 ballots.
Oh my God. Is
Yeah,
it legal? Do you know if it's legal? Anybody can answer this for a particular state. Is it, well, it must be in California. If it must be legal to pick up a ballot in California that's been sealed, right?
No, anybody can bring them in big batches. That's kind of a loophole. That's a problem.
Yeah, I'd say so.
So they go out to retirement homes and they do harvesting operations, especially the DNC, and they they might have a little party where on one level it's not too bad. Everybody vote. Let's get together and vote. Any questions, and then everybody votes. They get them, and as long as they're being honest, it'd be fine. So they put them in the envelopes and bring them in. But on the other level, it isn't too fine because it means that you could potentially be influencing those voters to vote a certain way, and maybe even opening them and changing them on the way in.
Jonathan says that there's a major GOP argument against vote by mail. Is this vote harvesting?
True, but I think that we can put into place some measures that will thwart, to kind of give confidence that that isn't going to happen. And actually, I don't think it really happens too much, except for that case in what was it, North Carolina, where they were doing that.
Right.
9th District, North Carolina. Yep.
Yeah. So
Falabi from Greenpeace says that Greenpeace is advocating prepaid postage, which may obviates the ballot harvesting thing, at least should.
Well, Harvey, back in 2004 in Cleveland, numerous reports of people in suits going to nursing homes, picking up the ballots, and they never made it to the Board of Election.
Right, that's called
and those were that was the mighty Texas Strike Force that was working with Karl Rove.
Right, that's the flip side of ballot harvesting is ballot de-harvesting, where you go, and that definitely happens. So, you can, the Republicans can argue against vote harvesting, but then they can pick up the ballots and pitch them in the river. That's been going on for 200 years. So, okay, that's an important issue and it's got to be dealt with. Number 6, will there be a postal service? The Republicans, the big corporations have wanted to kill the Postal Service for 200 years. U.S. Postal Service was founded in 1775, and Ben Franklin was the first Postmaster General. And they want to take it over as a business, just break it up, and like the national parks or all other public assets, they're billionaires who just want to own the Postal Service for their own private profit. Of course, we know Donald Trump would never allow such thing to happen. And then the Postal Service has 700,000 unionized workers. The American Postal Workers Union and the National Association of Letter Carriers are two of the biggest and, of course, most liberal unions in the country. So if Trump can destroy the Postal Service, he'll destroy those unions. A very large percentage of the membership of those unions are women and people of color. I happen to know I was in the business of selling uniforms to postal workers for 20 years. They are great people, and it's very clear. And now, of course, why they want to break it up. And now in 2020, the question is, if there's no postal service, how do you do vote by mail? And I'm sure that's first and foremost in Trump's mind. If he can destroy the postal service, vote by mail is out the window.
No, not true. That's not true. Basically, it doesn't matter if it's privatized or not. I think it's out of scope from what we have to work on. Whether or not the Postal Service is privatized or a public entity, the ballots can still be delivered just as well. In fact, you can use FedEx or UPS in any delivery mechanism you want, or hand carry them in. So I think by even energizing that as an issue, we're making a mistake. I don't think we should be talking about privatizing of the Postal Service because it makes it an issue when it probably wouldn't be if we didn't want to talk about it so much.
Okay, I can see that point of view. I have a personal affection for the Postal Service, so I'll probably.
Well, I like it too, but I'm just saying that it's not going to change whether or not ballots are brought in.
That's not clear. I mean, they could give it to UPS or FedEx, and weird things could happen. I mean, you mess with the Postal Service, you can't assume that UPS or FedEx are going to do the job. You know, especially if who's paying for it? Are you going to have people sign up to pay FedEx and UPS if it's not prepaid? How's that going to work?
Well, they can be dropped off. You know, to thwart that whole thing, as you say, drop off your ballot and don't use the postal service. So voting at home can still be done. In fact, it's probably a lot better, and most people that do it prefer to just drop theirs off versus use a postal service.
Okay, but that's a real can of words. I'll write about that and we can discuss it further. But I you know, vote by home without the postal service. What kind of contract is the UPS and FedEx going to work under?
I think you're just going to get sidetracked here, Harvey, on a whole bunch of issues that are out of scope from election integrity. We're talking about whether the postal service should be privatized. That's going to divert our attention from these much more serious issues. So I vote for basically, you know, deprecating that as an issue from the list, even though it's a concern, but it's not. We got too many other things to worry about than to worry about whether the postal service is privatized.
Well, let's talk about that next week. Let's think about that and talk about it next week. I think it's a big issue, but Ray, I understand your position, and I'm sure everybody else does. I'm sure some understand mine too, but it's going to be an interesting situation what happens, okay? Okay, where will the ballots go? And this is part of it. A vote by mail will mostly will likely be mailed back to election boards. Here in California, I walked my ballot on Sunday before the Tuesday into an elementary school. If there's only one voting station in these big counties like Franklin and Cuyahoga, boy, that's going to be a nightmare. And again, when will they open? Will they open election day? Will they open 2 weeks before election day? That's going to be decided state by state, county by county, correct? I mean, do we know?
I mean, part of the problem there is, I mean, at the last second, they installed some drop-off boxes, but also the workers had to be protected as well. But you're right, there was only one spot to drop them off. I mean, which makes no sense in a county as big as Franklin County.
Now, if you open the election centers 2 weeks prior to the election, which is what we want, 2 or 3, where are the ballots going to sit? What about security of the election?
There's all sorts of chain of custody questions that have to be worked out.
Okay, well, that's again going to be a state-by-state discussion, and the people who are working this in the states are going to have to know exactly what's going on with these ballots. Also, will there be places, if you have an issue, is the election center, if there's only one election center per county, is that the only place you're going to be able to go to register if you need to register in person? And if we want the availability to register 2 or 3 weeks in advance, is there only going to be one place per county to go? I mean, can you imagine, Bob, in Franklin County, if it was up at Coles, what's going to happen in the fall? So this is a question that we're going to have to deal with. Will there be places available? If we're having a vote by mail system, will there still be places where you can go in person to register to vote prior to the election? I assume that this is going to be in the hands of the legislatures, right? Or the secretaries of state, or maybe the governors. Does anybody know? Okay, well, that's going to be in the hands of people who are going to organize.
Well, in Ohio, it was up to the legislature.
And what did they say?
That there was only one spot, right? The Secretary of State set it for June 2nd and had additional spots in the larger counties. I mean, the Secretary of State, who's Republican, sided with the voting rights movement, but was overruled by a new state law.
So in the 50 states, and especially in the 6 swing states, or the 12 or the 18, it's going to be crucial to know in every state Will there be voting centers? Will there be only one voting center? Will it be open? How long will it be open prior to Election Day for people to come down and register to vote in person?
Well, it even gets worse in that in most of the major counties, Franklin County, you weren't allowed to advertise on how the vote was going to be held. It was considered a waste of taxpayers' money. The 2 Democrats said yes, the 2 Republicans said no, and the Secretary of State sided with the Republicans. So people were not being told through mass media campaigns exactly how to vote or register or get an application.
So that means that the election organizations in each state is going to have to be able to inform the electorate as to how they can register to vote.
Depending on the state, yes.
Well, that's a big job. That's, I mean, imagine a state like North Carolina or Ohio. These are big states. The swing states are all big, right? Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, Arizona. This is a daunting task to be responsible for informing everybody in the state how you can deal with being registered, right? What if the states, if the state of Ohio has explicitly banned the state from spending money to inform the public?
It's county by county. The counties vote on whether, but the boards are 2-2, 2 Dems and 2 Republicans. So the final decision goes to the Republican Secretary of State, and they're doing it along the guise of saving taxpayers money by not informing them how the voting process, which is brand new, was working.
God. And there's probably, there'll be varying time limits as to when you can, how far in advance of an election can you register? Some states still have same-day registration. Some states, who knows, right? So we'll need to understand in every state what the procedures are for registration. Now, one of the things, I guess Andrea, did you not come on? So Andrea Miller did not join us, which is okay, because we're going to deal with this next week. We should get to it. We're pretty much halfway through. The other question, and we have about 6 minutes left. So we're going to continue this next week. And I noticed that we have more people now than we did at the beginning. So some of you may be asleep by now, but this is the nitty gritty of what's going to decide our election. And Ray, I agree with you. We need to discuss whether to make the post office an issue or not. We will need to know how, if it goes to UPS and FedEx, what the procedures will then be, one way or another. Whoever handles the votes, however they're going to get mailed in, there have to be procedures set, whether it's UPS, the Postal Service, FedEx, Amazon, whoever's going to do it, Pony Express, Pigeons, there are going to have to be procedures, and we're going to have to know what those procedures are. Okay, so that's clear. The last thing I'll bring up. Go ahead.
Did you say the Democratic Party is making a court challenge against what the Republicans are driving people off of the voter rolls? Did you mention something about a Supreme Court challenge on that?
We haven't dealt with the voter rolls yet. We're going to deal with that next week.
You're going to have this conference next week for an hour and a half?
Yeah, we're going to do this. I'm going to do it for the duration. I don't know how many of you are going to last.
Every week?
If I can get Paul to do this, we're going to do this every week, Monday for an hour and a half, and we're not going to get through it by November. This is incredibly complicated stuff, as you can tell. I mean,
it's great to be able to talk to somebody about this.
Well,
thank you.
And Dr. Paul has been kind enough to facilitate this and to make available the recordings, which are really crucial. I've been sending them around. It's a big deal. We want to get them on radio if we can. And we want to have a website. We'll discuss that in more detail next week. The last thing I want to cover, and then I'm going to turn back to Joel again, because we do have to talk about organizing people on the ground, is the surrender rule. And actually, you know what? I'm going to wait on that because Mimi Kennedy, I don't think, is on. And she wanted to talk about the surrender rule. So we have 4 minutes left. And basically, I think you understand. Does everybody want to ask me anything? I mean, I'm going to be writing this up. I will resend an updated document between now and next Monday, as soon as I possibly can. At some point, I'll come up with a coherent article that can be published on the internet at Truth Out or BuzzFlash or one of those places. And so it'll be public document what we know and don't know about vote by mail so that everybody will have access to it in the states.
So
And
Harvey,
that's
you have a
the
big missing area in your document, which is citizen oversight of the operations of accepting these vote by mail ballots, such as checking signature verification. It's going to be very hard with COVID-19, where we're used to stand behind the computer terminal and watch them either confirm or reject signatures. And so this is an area that your document missed completely. No,
yes.
there's no
Okay, good.
oversight in there.
Are there any other, will you send me a paragraph on that, Ray?
Yeah.
My email is solartopia@gmail.
No, I'll
If
send it.
anybody wants to comment or add or correct or criticize, please send me an email, and I'm going to continue to compile this. So we're at point 9, the surrender rule. I want to stop. Mimi Kennedy has raised this. We only have 3 minutes left. This is the procedure. If you want to participate, please do. No rules, no organization, no titles. This is a compendium of information that will compile a document. Now, Joel Siegel, you're a co-convener. Again, let's reiterate, your point. We have to be recruiting people in the states, and if we can raise any money, God help us, we can raise the money. But I'm willing to do this, for food stamps or whatever, and we just got to keep doing it. Joel, do you want to jump in real quick? Oh, maybe Joel's gone. Okay.
He's not on. He's not on.
Joel Siegel is up to so, and I see Dr. King in the background there, Paul. I want to thank Dr. Paul again for putting this together. It's fantastic. It is a great group of people. Please come on again next week. We'll pick it up with the surrender rule. We're going to talk about universal paper ballots. Will there be voting machines in these? If there are voting stations, will there be voting machines? What are we going to do about that? When will the ballots be mailed out? And when are they due back in? These are huge questions, which are turning elections. You saw in Wisconsin, it made all the difference. Then a big one, a really big one, the section on voter ID. What voter ID will be required? What's the situation with signature verification, witnessing, and notarization? For God's sake, some states are requiring that mail-in ballots be notarized. I mean, that's going to knock, God knows how many people. Signature verification. If they're going to use your driver's license, which you signed with your fingernail on a touch screen, how's that going to stack up when you actually physically sign a ballot? Chain of custody. If the ballots are going to come in early, who's going to watch them? Where are they going to be preserved? The other question is, are they going to be counted when they come in, or are they going to wait till election day? We've had instances where ballots were counted early, and then of course the preliminary results leaked out. That can't happen. That's got to be stopped. Internet voting, Paul, you raised the issue. We'll have to talk a little bit about that. Vote by phone, and of course the digital divide. Many rural and poor areas, of course the homeless, don't have PCs in their tents. What are we going to do about the digital divide? Early counting, I mentioned. How will the ballots be counted? John Brakey has been advocating digital imaging. It's a big deal, digital imaging. If the paper ballots come in, are going to be digitally imaged. John says, in last call, said 80% of the precincts have digital imaging. How do we guarantee that they get used and used properly with the vote by mails? Reporting deadlines. This is a huge issue. I think that I think there's a reasonable case that the U.S. Senate and governor races in Florida were decided by the courts refusing to accept vote counts that came in after an arbitrary deadline. If we're doing vote by mail, you've got places that have never done this volume, and they have completely unrealistic deadlines for reporting. So state organizations are going to have to go into the counties and the election boards and get these deadlines extended. There is no way in a vote by mail situation that these states are going to be able to count these ballots to meet currently existing deadlines. Just not going to happen. And then there's an argument just at the end that, Trump is saying vote by mail favors Democrats. In some states, it favors Republicans. And I've got an article here from a conservative who says he thinks vote by mail favors Republicans. We don't need to, that's not our concern. We're technically nonpartisan. But, you know, as the case may be, that's what we'll deal with next time. And then we'll start in when we get a complete picture in our minds of vote by mail, the details, and what the states organizations in the states are going to have to deal with. I'll produce the document. We'll all look at it, and then we'll make it public, and then we'll move on to the questions of voter registration.
It favors Democrats in swing states. That's the issue, you know.
Yeah, but not if the ballots have to be notarized and have
No,
two
indeed.
signatures.
We got to fight back vigor.
So
We got to counterattack against the Republicans vigorously this time.
Right, but again, you know,
You're going to keep stealing elections.
It is what it is, and that's what we're going to have to describe in great detail. It's 3:32.
Okay, I'm going to unmute everyone as we say goodbye. Thank you, Harvey, for your
Hart's raising a hand.
Yeah, thank you, Harvey.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Paul.
Okay.
All right, email me.
That's all right.
We'll be back again, thanks to Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Same place. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Harvey.
I need a pen.
Okay. I sent Harvey some info about other groups organizing on the ground about expanding vote by mail, like the group represent us. Just to let you know.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
8905816.
Okay, Harvey, I'm going to sign it off. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate it.
Hi there.
Hi.
One second. Just gotta shake this.